fill in some of the biographical data. The Gazette and the 1972 biography today, or the green pamphlet that you gave me, have a pretty good rundown. I don't.
Sorry, you beat it. Go on. Go on.
I don't think
Right
that
Stay.
I need to get too much into details, but
Go ahead.
the one question that I'm dying to know the answer to is how many acres exactly does your farm have? I saw 3 different versions.
300. Well, as a matter of fact, I don't believe anybody knows exactly. It's never been surveyed. The deeds all say so many acres more or less. That's Vermont for you. But we think we have 320. 320 more or less, I guess you'd have to say.
That's in East Montpelier, right?
Yes.
When did you get that? Just out of
We
curiosity.
bought it the first year we came to Harvard. We came and rented this apartment on Memorial Drive and painted the inside of it ourselves, and it was by then August, and it was hot, and we had nothing to do until September when classes started, so we took a trip up north to look for some old friends of ours who we had known when I was secretary of the New Hampshire Farm Bureau Federation, and we expected to find them in Maine, but it turned out that this chap had been moved by the Farm Bureau Insurance Company to Concord, New Hampshire, so we said, well, we've nothing else to do, let's go and see if the Websters are still living in, see if the see how the Websters are. We'd exchanged Christmas cards all those years, but it had been 20, 25 years. And we found the Websters in Concord, where they bought an old house and fixed it up. And we found immediately we were as much friends as we'd ever been. We had rapport. So we said, gee, it would be nice if there were an old house like this that we could buy and fix up and come up here weekends. And so Russell said, well, I know a place, I'm not sure it's for sale, and I don't know whether it would suit you or not, but we have nothing else to do, let's take a look at it. And I think we spent perhaps 30, 40 minutes looking at the place and bought it.
Really? This was back in 1959.
Well, I can't remember dates
Or
right
what,
well, but it was the year I came to Harvard, and that's on the record there somewhere. We had come back to Concord a second time, and I think it was in October. Anyways, when the leaves were turning, and it was on that occasion that we saw the house and bought it so quickly without. It was magnificent. It is a magnificent place.
It was an old farmhouse type?
Built in 1792, and on top of a ridge, or as some people might call it, a mountain. But the ridge would be closer to it, with a view. Of course, a very spectacular view.
Now you said Milton Friedman lives nearby.
Well, he lives about close to an hour's drive away.
Oh, he does.
In Vermont. When we first bought the place, he lived on the other side of the Connecticut River in New Hampshire, but he has since moved over to Vermont. And we see each other very often. I'd say when we're both there, probably on the average once a week.
Oh, you do? Huh. Anybody? I know Galbraith is up in Vermont.
As a matter of fact, this
and
last summer we had the Friedmans entertained Ken Galbraith and his wife, Bill Buckley and his wife, and ourselves. And
really?
We had a very enjoyable lunch.
Must have been a lively one, too.
Well, it was. Galbraith and Buckley are old friends.
Yeah.
They have places near each other in Switzerland. And while Galbraith and Milton are at opposite poles, of course, as economists. Milton has always treated Galbraith with civility, and I guess the same can be said of Galbraith.
Yeah, he moves around and all, but he's always traveling. Galbraith. He seems to.
Yeah, well, he's a professor emeritus now, as is Milton. They neither of them have teaching responsibilities.
One thing I was struck by in your biographical information, as its various stories and whatnot, is that interesting duality of working on going to school in Hartford and then living on the farm, I guess, or working on the farm weekends, and then also that carried right through after going to Connecticut, really working in farm matters for 7 or 8 years. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about, particularly in light of your interest in cities after eventually what.
How I got into the city business?
Well, how you felt, a little bit more about about your growing up and your subsequent interest in farm matters, what appears to be on your biographical notes. I don't know.
Well, I don't remember how much this is repetitious. I don't remember what's in the biographical notes, but I'll just.
Yeah, why don't you? It's not too much.
If I get to be too detailed, why tell me to speed it up, and I will. But my father was a farmer by temperament and taste. My mother was not. My mother was, as a sociologist would say, an upward mobile type. She wanted to live in the city. She wanted her kids to go to school. And my father accommodated her. He worked in a factory in Hartford so that we could go to school in Hartford. And he owned a little farm, 24 acres in Banfield, Connecticut, which he did the best he could with. It was really too small a farm even then to do very much with. But he in my childhood, I remember his working nights in the factory, and then after what must have been only a couple of hours sleep, going out the farm working all day. He was a hard-working man. So, and in the summer we would go out to the farm, and at first we lived in a tent or a lean-to, and then we built a house out there. But as a small child, I remember living in a tent out there. So I always had an attachment to both the city and the country in this way. And I was, as a sociologist would say, marginal to each. I don't know whether the concept of marginality means anything to you or not, but in sociology there are those who claim that the marginal man is more sensitive to those things that he's marginal to than the normal person. For example, a person who is a homosexual, let us say, is marginal to normal sexuality. He has a greater sensitivity to the nuances of behavior in the realm that's or you're ethnically marginal. Let us say you are or marginal in social class. You have an enhanced sensitivity to subtleties of relationships and different kinds of attachment. You perceive things that people who are fully a part of the culture or subculture, whatever it is, wouldn't perceive. Well, in this sense, I was marginal to both the city and the country. When I went to Connecticut State College, it was partly because I wanted to be a farmer, but it was also partly because I didn't think I could make the grade as a student of more serious matters. Well, I discovered practically the first week of my course in animal husbandry that agricultural English, as it was called, was not for me. And I was very much influenced by a young English professor who had come from Penn, as it turned out. And I soon switched into the English department out of agriculture. But when I retained some interest in agricultural things and attachment to the farm. When I got through college, it was in the middle of the Depression. I tried to get a job as a newspaper man.
I saw that.
That's what I wanted to be.
You got over that bit of fancy.
No, I got over it. Well, it was not. I'd been editor of the college paper, and I thought I was a pretty good journalist. But it was 1938, and jobs were hard to find. And I was intent on getting married right away.
Had you met your wife at college? Or?
Yes, she was in the same. She was a class ahead of me. And I went, in my naivete, I went to New York looking for a job. Last place in the world to find one, you know, because they all say, well, if you don't have any experience, well, we can't take you without experience. And I began to wonder how the devil anybody ever did get experience as a newspaper man. But anyway, I got back to Connecticut finally, and was hired by the publisher of the Rockville, Connecticut Journal. It was a weekly, and I did all kinds of things, mostly sell advertising for him, run errands, that sort of thing. And then the hurricane of 1938 came along, and I got a chance to be a publicity man for the Timber Salvage Administration, which was set up by the Forest Service to salvage what was merchantable of the timber that had been blown down and reduce the fire hazard in the New England forest. And that was my first taste of bureaucracy. I worked for them for a year or so, and then moved from that into the Farm Bureau Federation in New Hampshire as the secretary of the Farm Bureau Federation. And there my job was to edit the publication for the Farm Bureau and solicit membership and accompany my boss to Farm Bureau meetings in Washington and other places. And I got some sense of how an interest group operates and what was going on in the Washington scene, and I moved naturally from that into the Farm Security Administration, which was in 1940 or thereabouts. It's a very exciting enterprise for a young person. It had the kind of appeal that I suppose OEO community action programs probably had a few years ago for young people. And I stayed with them for quite a few years in various parts of the country. First, I was a regional information specialist in Upper Darby. Maine through Maryland was my region. And then I was moved to, I believe it was Indianapolis next, and I had the Midwest states. Then I did a turn in Washington. Much of the time, or some of the time anyway, sitting in the galleries in the House or Senate, listening to what was going on and telephoning the news back to my boss when our appropriations bills were being considered and so on. That was exciting. And from there I went to San Francisco as a regional information specialist. I had Nevada, Utah, California, and Arizona in my bailiwick. And that brought me in contact with Utah, and I got interested in the Mormons and the problems of poverty in southwest Utah. And when the Farm Security Administration began to pall on me, I came to the conclusion that it wasn't doing as much good as I thought it was. And I felt it was going to seed, and I wrote an article proving to myself anyway, and I think pretty conclusively that it really had done the tenant farmers more harm than good, which I published. I think it was one of the first articles that I ever published. I could give you a reprint if you're interested. By this time I decided to quit, and for reasons that I'll go into if you want to, but this is probably the first one. Yeah, this is our interruption here.
All right, well, we can...
Well, I'll just turn it off for a moment.
Okay.
It may be that they can do it without. The administration had decided to reorganize and change the regional lines and enlarge the region, and the result was going to be a lot of files were to be changed and some were to be destroyed. And a friend of mine who was a professor of economics at Berkeley was very much interested in the so-called cooperative farms that the Resettlement Administration, which was the predecessor of the Farm Security Administration, had started. These were sometimes called collective farms. They weren't necessarily very collective about them, but they were cooperative farms. And in our region there had been a very celebrated one. And he was very much afraid that all the records would be destroyed. So I said, well, I'll get the records and send them over to the Bancroft Library instead of to destroy them. So when I began to pull the records out, it seemed to me that, so I cut it out, that it wouldn't mean anything much, the records wouldn't be intelligible to a future researcher unless I tied it together with a little account of what each of the major pieces was, the article of incorporations and so on. And I got started putting things together, and about that time I decided to leave the Farm Security Administration, and I decided to write a magazine piece on the history of this cooperative farm. And before I got through, it had become a book, and my friend at Berkeley called me one day and said that Rexford Guy Tugwell, was one of the brain trusters of the Rosebud, had been the first administrator of the, well, had been is that true? Was he the first? No, he wasn't the first, but he'd been administrator of the Resettlement Administration, and he was really the originator of these cooperative farms. Paul Taylor asked Rex if he would like to hear what happened to his cooperative farms, and Rex said yes, he would. So Taylor invited me over, and I told Rex some of what I found. And he said, why don't you join us at the University of Chicago? He said he had just come from Puerto Rico, where he'd been governor of Puerto Rico. And he said he'd been invited to start what was called the Program of Research and Education and Planning. Faculty, and I said, I don't know the first thing about planning or social science. I don't even know what it is. I have a degree in English. He said, it doesn't make any difference. Nobody knows what it is. He hired me as an instructor, and I was to be a graduate student and an instructor at the same time. And I was very impressed with the challenge that to such an extent that I thought it would be impossible to find time to fill my pipe and light it and learn all that I would have to learn in order to be a teacher and an instructor and a graduate student at the same time. I quit smoking as preparations for this, and that was well, we had 2 children by then, and the job at Chicago, of course, paid less than half of what I was getting, had been getting in the government. But my wife was more than willing to make the change, and we did, and we never regretted it for a moment. In fact, I can't imagine what life would have been like if I had I was going to say stayed in the government, but I guess the truth is if I had not got into academic life, because
it's really remarkable how that kind of one conversation with the...
Well, Tugwell was an extraordinary person. Other people connected with the program on planning were absolutely appalled when they heard that he'd hired me, who I had no background, whatever, but I suppose it sounds immodest for me to say this, probably is, it only sounds what it is, but the fact is Tugwell had an extraordinary capacity for picking able people to do things. So one of his great talents was all through the New Deal. Was this? While he and I collaborated, we wrote several articles together, at the time, my point of view, I suppose, when I went there wasn't very different from his, except that I had become pretty disillusioned about the firm security administration and its works, and I was probably prepared to see parallels in other things without realizing it. But I was a new dealer in good standing when I left. And the first things that I wrote with Rex were, we had no problem of establishing agreement. We thought along the same lines and wrote in much the same style. But later on, after a year or so, well, I guess it might have been a couple of years, I began to realize that I simply had a very different view of things than he did, and my point of view changed. And he's a marvelous man. He's a perfect gentleman. He never showed the slightest impatience with me or annoyance at having turned out to be a conservative by his standards anyway. And we are still good friends. I guess he's in his early 90s now. He's just published another book.
Really?
Yep. And the last one he published was a huge tome a couple of years ago, and it was an excellent book. So, although not one that I can agree with in its essentials, but it was it's a very respectable piece of work. The Fellows were very good, very generous and kind to us, and we were very, very fond of them.
The University of Chicago at that time must have been
It was a very exciting place. And I was brought into contact with other people my own age from other disciplines. One in economics, for example, Julius Margolis, who was later the chairman of the program. One was Julius Margolis, a young economist who had just got his degree from Harvard, and I learned. I won't say I learned a lot of economics because I don't know a lot of economics, but I became infected with what you might call an economizer's point of view. I came to have more understanding and sympathy for what economists try to do, how they think, than most social scientists do. Now, cut it out, Sashi. Cut it out. Now, sit down. Sit down. Stop it. You're a disgrace to dogdom. And another who should be brought into the story at this stage is Martin Meyerson, who was a city planner in this group. Meyerson had got a CP degree, city planner degree from Harvard, and had been one of the planners in the Michael Reese Hospital redevelopment there in Chicago. And like myself, and Margolis was an instructor in the program on planning. After a year or so, I had got into what I call the theory of planning, the theory of decision making. It was an attempt to define planning as a procedure for making rational decisions. And as you probably know, there's quite a literature that was being developed at that time, largely by Herbert Simon, on rational decision making, and I was dipping into this. Meanwhile, Meyerson had been invited to be the planner for the Chicago Housing Authority, which had received an authorization to build, I think it was 12 new public housing projects in Chicago, and the problem was where to build them, choose the sites for them. And his job was essentially site selection for the 12 projects. And he was to take leave from the university, and we were friends. And he said, "Well, you're thinking about rational decision making, and I'm going into this thing to make some rational decisions." decisions. And I'll keep notes of what I do, and why don't we collaborate? You supply a theory, I'll supply the facts, how decisions are made rationally. Well, he discovered after he got there for a while it wasn't so easy to make rational decisions.
I was gonna
The
say.
Chicago Housing Authority. But we did write a book together, which came to be called Politics, Planning, and the Public Interest. The order of those elements is not without its significance, because it's essentially the first of several case studies that have been written of what is most the pathology of planning. But I got a little ahead of the story there, because I've written another book earlier, which my doctor's dissertation essentially was my doctor's dissertation, and been published as a book called Government Project, and it was in the main what I had been writing on this cooperative farm in Arizona. It was based on the material that I had got interested in when I was about to leave the Farm Security Administration, and so it is a very detailed account of the dynamics of the relationships among these 60 families who were the cooperators, so-called, and the bureaucrats who tried to assist and supervise them. It's an account of the eventual of the success at first. The thing lasted. We made quite a bit of money because the price of beef was rising as the war came on. And then the eventual failure and collapse of the thing because these people couldn't get along with each other or with the bureaucrats. And it was broken up, and the lawyers got the remains. People went back to what they'd been, farm laborers. And had lost the farm that they had owned cooperatively. Well, the government, of course, had a big mortgage on it, but that they could have owned was worth $1 million when they started, and it would be worth many times that now if they'd stayed there. But that's the transition from my agricultural phase, the interest in the well, no, that's not the whole. I continued to do other things that expressed that aspect of my interest. Because after I had finished this thing with Meyerson, I'm not sure about the timing here, but somewhere along there, I became interested in what I call the sociology of efficiency, the social circumstances under which resources are used efficiently or inefficiently. This is indicative of the influence of Margolis and others on me, I guess. And the fact that in my own studies, I took a field in sociology of social psychology. The University of Chicago was considered itself a research institution. They placed great emphasis on research, and they gave young people, including instructors, freedom and money to go do research, and they expected them to. Well, I took my family out to southwest Utah, which was an area that I had become acquainted with while I was with the Farm Security Administration, to study the conditions that affected the efficiency or lack of efficiency of resource use in southwest Utah. And we stayed there living in a small Mormon hamlet, 22 families, Gunlock.
What is that?
The name of the place is Gunlock, Gunlock. It's not too far from St. George, Utah, which is itself somewhere about halfway between Salt Lake City and Las Vegas.
That's quite a.
But there were more people, and there were more horses in Gunlock than there were people. And the temperature in the summer gets to be about 120. We were there off and on for more than a year, and I wrote a little book called Mormon Hamlet, a manuscript of a book called Mormon Hamlet, as well as some local history. And my publisher was going to get Bernard DeVoto to write an introduction to the thing. But every time the publisher came to Boston, for some reason or other, DeVoto was somewhere else. They never managed to talk about my book anyway. Meanwhile, I had gone off to southern Italy with my family to do another somewhat similar study, because we had never been to Europe, and of course we wanted to go, and here was an opportunity. The Mormons were prototypically commercial farmers. They are mentioned in Max Weber's account of the Protestant ethic and the rise of capitalism. One expects the Mormons to be calculators and rational and commercial. On the other hand, the peasants, as far as I could have found from the literature, had not only a non-commercial but a non-rational attachment to the land, a sentimental attachment to the land. And that was the prevailing view, anyway, it seemed to be. And I thought it would be an interesting contrast to study the conditions affecting the efficiency of land use in a place where people had this allegedly sentimental attachment to the land. We first thought of going to France, but because my wife's background was, she was of Italian origin, spoke Italian very well, we decided to go to Italy, and also because the really desperate problems of poverty were in land use were in southern Italy, we decided to go there. And we again took our children and spent a year or so there, and I did write a book, which I gave you a copy on the moral basis of backward society. By this time, by the time I got back with that, the thing I'd written on the Mormons seemed obsolete to me. I had got beyond it, and I didn't want to go. I was tempted to go back and get some more data and do some more work on it, but I had an opportunity to make a study of politics in Chicago under financially auspicious circumstances. I needed the money, and I having done this thing with Meyerson, I was by this time initiated enough in the politics of Chicago to feel that it was something I could do readily enough. It was Mayor Daley's first administration, so I wrote this book called Political Influence on essentially on politics of Chicago. By that time, I was pretty well defined, for other people anyway, as an urban man. I'd written a book with Meyerson on public housing. I'd written Political Influence. And by this time, I was teaching a course at Chicago on city politics, which was a natural thing to do from the experience I'd had in writing these books. And I decided to write a book that would be a general account of the politics of American cities. Most of the literature on American city government at this time was concerned mainly with public administration, not with politics. So this was rather something of a departure from the normal. In fact, it was doubtful whether anybody would consider it would be a publishable venture, because textbooks anyway all had to be state and local government. That's the way courses were organized. And here I was writing a book that was to be called City Politics. One of the students I had in the course, and it turned out to be one of the best graduate students, wrote a book called a dissertation, later published as a book called Negro Politics. And it was based on stuff in Chicago, although he later filled out with more material from New York and Los Angeles, but the dissertation was on Chicago. And that was James Q. Wilson. And he I invited him to be a collaborator with me on city politics, and we finished it up together. By that time, I had come here, and Wilson came a year or so later as a lecturer.
Now, let me get the chronology of that straight. He was...
yeah, I'm terrible at
well, not exact dates, but in terms of his book, Negro Politics, and your book, his dissertation, did he collaborate with you on city politics and write his dissertation simultaneously?
No, he'd finished his dissertation.
Okay.
And I don't think he had done anything in the collaboration. In fact, I don't think the collaboration was far enough along so he could. I mean, I hadn't put enough stuff of my own on paper, perhaps. At any rate, my recollection is that we did the thing together when we were here. When we were both here. He was here as a lecturer, which is
yeah, because that was published in Big City Politics, right?
No, there are two books. There's City Politics.
Oh, City Politics.
Yeah.
That was published in '63. So
right. And Big City Politics was something I did on my own later. It was it's just a small paperback which described the politics of I think 6 cities, but it was not anywhere near as ambitious a venture as city politics. It was Big City Politics sort of implies the other one is Little City Politics, but Big City Politics was simply the politics of 6 big cities: Philadelphia, Boston, Atlanta, Detroit. I forget.
Chicago.
No, not Chicago, because I had, in a sense, done Chicago in
Yeah.
these other books, and not New York, because New York was too big and too complicated. In fact, the intention had been to do 12 cities, but I guess the publisher got qualms about 12, and he thought, well, why don't you do 6 at a time? And after I'd done the first 6, I was bored with the project and didn't want to do the other 6, so I never did.
Let's, why don't I just flip over this thing?